Hello, and welcome to the Realigned Journey, the unfiltered guide to self discovery and reconnection. I'm Sierra Sambrowski, your host, and together we'll deep dive the topics that have caused us to lose touch with ourselves and explore ways to reconnect to our true self. This particular season, I am interviewing guests and we're talking about their personal stories, those pivotal moments and experiences that really realign them and help them get to a new place, what they've learned from it. And so it seemed like only the right thing for me to do it myself, honestly. And for those of you that don't know me, that don't know me as more really than just this podcast host, what I'd like to share with you is a brief bio about me. And quite honestly, I'd like to think of myself as sort of being disruptive, rebellious, some might even say. But my work has really evolved into a place where I believe that I am this true intersection of business, self healing, and spirituality. And it allows me to really be this vessel that sees super clearly what someone's highest potential is, what their business's highest potential is, and then be able to translate that into clarity and direction and strategy and real action steps. Sort of the caveat to all of that is that um, besides the fact that I'm intuitive, and so spirit gives me sort of like a cheat sheet on everybody, which I'm very grateful for, and I've come to fully embrace and accept, and just be so humbled and so grateful that I get worked with that way. Um, but the other piece of that is that, I, besides having an education in holistic health, have also fully embrace the idea that we are holistic beings. We often hear the quote, the phrase that we're a spiritual being having a human experience, which is true. And I 100%, if you've listened to any other episodes, you should get that about me by now. Um, but the idea in my work where the shift came from for me was going from a very traditional business consultant that um, worked primarily in extremely male-dominated industries, s- still does to a certain now. It's just I often have women that work in that own companies in male-dominated industries, but regardless, you know, the truth of the matter is that we are the vessel in which we birth, create, grow, nurture our business. And so, whatever we think is happening in our business, what really happens is that it's about switching back to what's happening in you. And for many business owners, this is about maybe things that are coming up, things that they've never addressed, things that they've ignored, and then all of a sudden it really is. And for me in particular, there comes to be this place, oftentimes from a major loss or life transition. And um, again, if you follow me on any kind of social platforms, I potentially have an unhealthy and strange affinity to grief and working with things as they're ending and really helping somebody create that continuity in their life and in their business as they transition to this new phase, right? And a big part of that comes from the idea that oftentimes, particularly when we get well seated into our 40s and beyond, um, we start to have this place where we might be losing parents. We might have had a business partner for 10 years that's fallen apart. fell apart. Our kids are gone, so now we're experiencing empty nest. Maybe we're going through a divorce. Whatever these major life transitions and losses are, it cracks us open in a way that allows us to start to question, who am I? What am I doing? Why do I have this business? It stresses me out. It wipes me out, whatever. And so, uh, my specialty is really to be able to work with people. Not that I don't work with people in other stages and places, and certainly not this specific of a circumstance, but this is like, I always tell clients that, our target markets are a target. Think about it that way. And so you have a bullseye, and there's other rings that are super well suited to you and that you certainly serve, but there's a bullseye. And for me, that bullseye point is really those clients that, like I said, have gone through some kind of major life loss and are really questioning a lot of things and about themselves, about their lives, about the beliefs and the framework and things that they've put around in their life and in their business, whether they really are theirs and whether they really serve them or not anymore. And so this is a really long, this is a really long bio. Sorry, I don't do anybody else's bio this long. But you know, they often come to me because they're seeing things in their business. They said maybe there is an unspoken questioning about whether their business is even right for them anymore or not. And um, they just really need some clarity and they really need some direction and they have had their confidence shaken. And so, yeah, I incorporate my intuitive gifts along with a lot of business consulting experience, primarily in operations, business development, and marketing, um, along with my education and private coaching practice that I had on a holistic health and a holistic life approach and certification in grief. And so that was long, wrapped up with really short. And in this episode, I think you're going to learn a lot more about me personally as I share with you all some of the most pivotal and impactful moments that have completely realigned me. And, you know, it has been reflected in my professional career and in my business's evolution, as it will. And, I had the great pleasure a couple of weeks ago being on my dear friend Isabel Fortin's um, show that is called People, Passion, and Purpose. Oh, I might have got those P's mixed up. Sorry, Isabel, if you're listening. If anybody's interested, though, they can just reach out to me and I'll be happy to share that. But excuse me, that show I really dug into and talked a lot about having my daughter at 17. And so I'm gonna kind of skip that in this episode where I talk to you about some pivotal points and moments in my life. Because I really kind of dug into that with her. And, just to touch on it briefly, what I will say is that obviously that changed my life and it was completely pivotal. And, there was a lot of surprise. It was a major realignment for my life at such an early age. Uh, at this time, I certainly appreciate that. I'm kind of glad that it was as young as it was. It made some parts of the journey really difficult. Obviously, having a child at 17 on your 17th birthday is tough. Um, However, I had already been at a place in my life where I don't even know that type A is strong enough, honestly. Um, I was very anxious, very over responsible, super stressed out, completely disassociative from feelings, very high overachieving, um, super perfection driven, very goal driven. And I was all the things that people did not expect somebody to turn up with a teenage pregnancy. And I had at the time, you know, gotten a full academic scholarship, and it was for a dual major, pre-law and environmental science. And I never saw myself getting married, having kids, any of that stuff. There's no question that my life would look super different than it does right now. And more importantly, I would be a shell of the person that I am right now. I know that. And I had always had this knowing, even though I didn't realize what my spiritual gifts were then. I look back on it and I just, no matter how scared I was, how uncertain I was, unprepared I was, I knew that my daughter was a gift and that she was realigning me. I actually got messages that I didn't realize were messages at the time, but I kept hearing a voice in my head keep saying to me, and it certainly wasn't my teenage self, um, that my daughter was a gift and this was realigning me. And so, that's all we're going to dig into around that particular one. Because, like I said, I really did go into it a lot when I talked with Isabel on her show a couple weeks ago. So you can definitely catch it over there. One of the things that, oh man, I've had so many pivotal moments, honestly. So many things that I can look back on now and go, oh, yeah, this is completely different than where I would have been going had this not happened. And I think it's interesting. Some of this is stuff that I would say was destiny, right? And then some of it or fate or universe driven, whatever phrase you like. And then some of it was my own choice. Um and I and my own will, again, to my own detriment, because I think one of the reoccurring themes, and I'm again not going to go into it. I understand where some of this comes from a trauma place and a belief programming, childhood wounding place. But I certainly have a really pronounced, pronounced habit, behavior pattern of staying in things, staying with things well beyond where I should have, beyond where logic and reason, even though I'm super logical and really reasonable. People are always like, but you're a woo-woo person. I know, but it's so funny. I still love the science and I still look for the science to prove things all the time. I don't know exactly what that means. I mean, I guess I kind of do, but um I like being that balance. It's exactly why my work is so important to me now, and it's brought me to where I am. It's that there's this really like linear, pragmatic, practical, organized part of me um that I I don't know that it dominates as much anymore, but it certainly is a strong 50%. Um, and maybe at certain times that kind of waves in and out or whatever, but largely, largely it's pretty, I guess it depends on what mode I'm in too. But it's there. It's always there. And I think I don't even remember where I was at before I started talking about it. This is the problem with having these solo episodes. I can really kind of go off. But, I think the the pattern of staying in things and staying committed and loyal to things for so much longer than what was good to me. Like I said, part of it was a will, which I know now to be driven by programming or belief that it made me weak in some version. I think it made me think. I didn't often think of it as that word weak specifically. Um, I think I often judged myself as like, no, if you were a better person, if you were the person that you think you want to evolve and become and be in your highest version, like you should be able to overcome these things as far as like mistreatment or um even like not being happy. And it's weird because in some ways I think as I've developed spiritually, I could be even more harsh and critical with myself around these ideas because I have this deep understanding that like, you know, happiness is internal and it's not dependent on these external circumstances or factors. And so I would allow that to cause me to stay into situations and dynamics and relationships well beyond because I thought, well, if I'm really that spiritual, I should be able to transcend the fact that this feels terrible. And I should be able to transcend the fact that this is, you know, dumb, for the lack of a better term. I'd be like, this is so stupid. This is such a human thing. So many people have it worse, right? I should be able to transcend this. I should be able to raise above this. Um, and so I think there was this constant self-criticism that turned into spiritual toxicity, right? Because like I said, you would use all of these um spiritual teachings, spiritual understandings, spiritual beliefs that were replacing my personal beliefs, my childhood programmed beliefs. And honestly, I was not fully ready to integrate them in the way that they should have been because I was then weaponizing those against myself. And I think that the truth is that there's a lot of people that do that. I think that it's probably something that I see in a lot of my clients in some shape or form. Maybe it's not always that toxic spiritual belief system, but they have somehow weaponized their resilience and their strength, their superpowers even, to diminish themselves, to criticize themselves, to judge themselves. And so, no matter what their outside experience looks like, they can be a fucking hot mess on the inside. And, I think for me personally, that has been an ongoing theme, right? Like I said, and I understand the psychology side of it and where some of that mask wearing comes from a survival technique. And yet it's not all prescriptive book stuff. I mean, I've had a shit ton of therapy in my life, you know. I've done therapy. I asked for therapy when I was in my teens before I even got pregnant. The funny thing is it was when my parents found out that I was pregnant, so they finally let me go. Um, Prior to that, I had asked, and it's like, what teenager in the late 80s, early 90s was asking to go to therapy? I don't know. I don't know what it was in me. I look back, I've had these conversations with others, and I think that there was always something deeply in me that had this drive and this knowing that I could be happier than I was, that I could be bigger than I was. And actually, this brings up something, no irony here, because everything comes out of me for a reason, just like everything shows up in our lives for a reason. Anyway, I'm kind of like having my own awareness moment, like trippy awareness moment right now, because one of the things that I have circled back to more recently in my healing journey, and I think this is true too. I think that we have to circle back to some of the foundational exercises, points, beliefs. I mean, life will fucking take you back there anyway. Let's be real clear about that. Oh man, I'm super jumping all over. It's like that whole spiral effect, right? The spiral is sacred because what it is meant to show us is that these times where we feel like we're repeating and going back to a place that we're not actually going back to anything. You're always at a different level, even though you find yourself sort of in the same linear spot, linear from more of an access point rather than actual on a line. Um, and that's hard to demonstrate in a podcast, what it is that I'm speaking of. you know, and I'm not a math major. So I just remember that there were like these accesses that would s- um, converge across the circle or the circumference, right? And I don't remember what they were called. It doesn't matter. The point that I'm trying to make is that it always can serve us to go back to these places. And so for me personally, I have been revisiting some of the old beliefs because I always think this is so important. It's something that I like to dig into clients that are willing and ready to go there. It's really exploring these old beliefs and which ones we need to shed. And I bring all this up because people were like, "Well, don't you think you should have done that by now?" Well, of course I fucking did that by now. The reality is that I've done it a whole bunch of times. And again, not using self uh, criticism, self judgment to beat myself up about the fact that you can find yourself back in a similar situation, something that looks and feels the same, and be like, you clearly didn't do this, right? Because no, no. Every time we go into new phases and stages of our lives, it's the primary beliefs that were programmed into us and that we sometimes can carry for generations in our DNA ancestrally, right? Um, are going to show up again. They're just going to show up again. They, you are always in a different place though, because you are not the same person. James Valentine and I talked about this in last week's episode. You are not the same person that you just were, you know, 8 minutes ago. We are constantly in change. And so I personally have been revisiting these old beliefs, which I've worked on in therapy and energetic healings and all kinds of shit, right? I've done all kinds of stuff. Most of my healing has been very self-directed. A lot of reading, a lot of doing the exercises, a lot of doing all the things because that's who I am. I'm a doer. So I like all the practical tools and resources and all that. But I personally have gone back to this place for myself of reevaluating the old beliefs that I have identified multiple times and yet still are holding some kind of hook in me. And one of them is that idea of knowing inside myself that I was meant to do something big, significant since I was a kid. And it's amazing the amount of guilt and shame that I was met with whenever I expressed it as a kid, and then continued to carry on for myself to the point that I would, again, going back to self-criticism, self-judgment, beat myself up about it, how delusional it was, irresponsible it was, ungrateful it was. Of course, one of the reoccurring themes for all of my childhood, in fact, probably not even completely gone, is being told, "Who do you think you are?" And I guess maybe part of that is what internally, subconsciously drives me to my work now, because I feel so overly committed to um, make people confident, empowered, in love, compassionate to who they really are in their biggest form. And I would be absolutely lying to say that I don't have some of that very same thing to do for myself. And honestly, like I said, I'm kind of revisiting all of this for myself, going back to the basics, doing the same belief exercises that I incorporate and use with clients at times. You know, doing the mirror work again, doing all these things and saying to myself, because I realized I've been given this gift to see the highest potential in other people and to love them and empower them and action orient them into this place where they can then fully embody, embrace, see it, and hear it for themselves. And yet, I have to ask myself, do I see my highest potential? Will I commit to loving and supporting and helping guide and lead her to her biggest accomplishments, her full potential, her highest potential? I do that for so many other people. And so here I am calling that back to myself and making sure that I'm well seated in that for myself. I think I have been for a while, for a long time, for where I was. And I think, like a lot of other people, maybe right now, but at some point in their life, you take these big jumps forward and deepening that sense of knowing your own power, being confident in it, being loving and compassion with it, um, is what helps you make that leap forward. And in an even more simplistic and corporate way, it's about understanding and connecting to your divine essence. Because the more we recognize and understand that in ourselves, and the more you feel embodied and confident and loving and bold and whatever other things you want to talk about in your own potential, in your own belief in yourself, and then the higher it takes us in life, whatever that form looks like, 'cause it doesn't have to look like, you know, Oprah status. So Oprah, if you're listening, there's been a lot of shout outs to Oprah on my podcast lately. Um, I would love to have a conversation with you and be interviewed. I'm not afraid of that. But obviously that's not for everybody. It doesn't need to be. There should be no more shame in being somebody who works at the Aldi store as a cashier and register. Look, I need that. There's a lot of people that need that. That store wouldn't run, and people go there for their groceries, and that's how we eat. No matter what your role is in life, no matter how small your dreams may be in comparison, like maybe your dream is just to be able to buy a new car someday. Maybe your dream is just to be able to buy jeans from J.C. Penney rather than a thrift store someday. I mean, there's nothing wrong with that. Maybe your dream is just to be able to go to Ocean City, Maryland for a weekend vacation. There's nothing wrong with that. One dream is not bigger or better than the other, technically, even though I've talked about like having this bigger version for myself. I guess maybe it's not bigger, it's more exposed. And that's hard. That's real, real hard. I, t- I don't know. It's funny, it just popped into my head about like when I was young, I used to love to sing. Had no fear about it either. And act. I loved being in the school plays and, getting assigned solos. And I even thought maybe once in my teens that I should try and be an actress. And until I would go and do karaoke into my 20s. No fears. And I don't even remember, I could not pinpoint what that moment was that all of a sudden I was afraid. And I've basically never done it again. Um, and I think that points to something. I think it points to some internal moment in me where I decided to give up the dream that I was going to be somebody that had the courage to stand out in front of people and speak up. I mean, I talked about the dual major that I was going to have was I was pre-law and environmental science, and because it was my plan, which by the way, I actually drew out a life timeline for myself at 12 years old, and I may still have it somewhere, and it was really strategic. But it started with this path as an attorney, moved all the way up to the Supreme Court. I don't think that's happening. Um, but it was this whole thing around feeling like I had been tapped or called to be the person that kind of really isn't afraid to stand up in front of crowds, to be a voice in an unpopular opinion. Another dear friend, Meredith Ochoa, and I were talking about this the other day about the, inconvenient truths and the things that everybody would like you to stay quiet about. And I spent a lot of my life, and I guess something in my 20s shut, clicked in and really made me ultimately afraid to share my voice and say the inconvenient truths, the things that people don't want to hear, the things that largely people don't believe in, that they're going to scoff at, that they're going to criticize, that they're going to reject you for. Somewhere in my 20s, for whatever reason. And I always, it comes up now as I'm thinking about it and processing it, that that's where that complete shutdown came from, that I would be a person that has that courage. And yet here I am, open back up again. I mean, here I am, I'm really publicly, in other interviews and my content and what I put on my LinkedIn profile that I talk to people about, right? I'm not afraid to say that my spiritual gifts and my viewpoints and beliefs around business and grief are very uncommon, and they are extremely inconvenient for a lot of people. And they would much rather that I be scoffed at and criticized and made to shut up. Um, and they try and they do that. And it's a lie to say that it's not painful. I think one of the pivotal times for my life was probably, I guess, mid-30s, maybe. And I've talked about this with other people before on their shows or interviews. Really, when I started to have this, you know, what I guess some would call a spiritual awakening, though, like I said, I always had these really crazy, insane experiences that I know now was heightened spiritual gifts for all my life. I just didn't have a framework for it. And so I don't know that, I guess a spiritual awakening was really about just a deeper understanding and awareness. It was more about understanding, though. It's not that I wasn't aware, because I always knew that I had these weird things that happened to me or that I would know information about strangers and things. Um, though I didn't have an understanding for it. So I just always thought it was my imagination. But I think about being in my mid-30s, starting to understand, starting to have some kind of framework, having the intensity and the frequency of these experiences, which I didn't know at the time were spiritual. Now I would call them spiritual experiences. Um, the intensity of them, the clarity of them, the frequency of them, all of that was increasing, and I thought that I was losing my mind. Like, literally. I thought that I possibly had schizophrenia, and very logically and pragmatically, as I have already said that I am, and especially was when I was younger, started to contemplate this idea around the fact that I may have schizophrenia and I was probably going to have to go, like, commit myself, take myself to some kind of psychiatric facility, get evaluated, get straightened out. And that, I was a single mom at the time, so who was gonna take care of my daughter? And what was this gonna do to her? And it was, like, super stressful. I mean, I was freaking out about all of it. Of course, now looking back on it, I think, well, it should have been one of my primary indications, the fact that I was being so linear and logical and pragmatic about what was gonna need to happen and how I was gonna need to start putting things in place and taking steps. But, I wasn't at the time. I was just scared, really worried, really anxious, really lost. And there was praying, Again, everybody that has followed along enough with me has come to know that despite being what I call spiritual at this point, and it doesn't mean that I don't believe in God, that I don't pray and all that good stuff. And I was praying my ass off then. Not gonna even lie about that. Um, and it stopped. The experiences that I was having that were making me think that I was crazy like legit crazy, as I've had plenty of therapists say we don't use the word crazy. Um, and we don't, that's probably politically incorrect and very insensitive of me to call someone crazy. But um, I thought I was losing my mind. I didn't know what it was. I was hoping for schizophrenia. Um, I thought I had gone mad. And so, praying to God to have it stop so that I didn't have to put my daughter through this more than anything was really my biggest moment. And it was a catalyst for healing in me that I cannot imagine. I can't imagine how or where or when that would have ever happened had I not kind of had this, what I thought was a psychotic break. Um, Now I know that it wasn't. But it also kicked off this whole thing in my life where there were all these things that I had piled onto me, relationships, friendships, a sense of who I was, a sense of responsibility that no longer served me, and they all had to go. They all had to go. And going back to this idea about holding on to things and staying in things longer than some part of me knew it was time to get out of. Um, this was the kick in the ass. I always say sometimes they shove you down the stairs, which is a really ugly analogy to make, but it can fucking feel like that. It doesn't feel like you got knocked down and they kicked you in the ass. It feels like you got punched in the jaw and then shoved down the stairs backwards. That has been a lot of my major pivotal moments, like I said, and that's a really ugly, not that I should judge it, super not positive. And it was my own self-will. It was my own self-will that made it get to these extreme points where then I find myself so lost, so stripped down of all the things that really were not serving me, were not really aligned with who I am and where I wanted to go in my deep, deep, deep childhood core that I had completely and totally forgotten. The spirit always knows. They know who they mean for you to be, and they will help you get there despite yourself, despite all the programmings, despite the wounds, despite the beliefs that you've drilled into yourself, despite holding on too long. It's just that if we can't recognize those correction points, the points where when you start to get off the path, they go, okay, that's far enough. Now let's come back over here. If you keep going off into the woods, it gets harder and harder to get yourself back on the path, like the experience that will get you back there. Um, and that's been me, so here I was in my 30s. First, I thought I was having a psychotic break and I was going to need to be admitted. Like I said, it huge shift in my friendships, in my social circle. So I felt extremely alone. I had really there's been multiple points, but this was one of them for sure, where I had really sort of separated myself from my family. Um, I'd always felt like a black sheep, but I've gone through phases where, you know, really being I don't even know what the word. I want to say segregated or excommunicated. That's that Catholic upbringing in me. But just really estranged from them, kind of by my own choice. And it took me to a really dark place. And I've been there before too. And I was there after. But these pivotal moments, these experiences, and I haven't even told you a whole lot of them because I've had all these other things come up that I wanted to say and share with you all. Um, they are, and I hesitate to actually say this out loud because it's one of those things that you find just fucking exhausted when you're going through some shit and people keep saying this to you. They really are for our highest and best good, though. They they're trying to get you to pay attention to what is not you, what does not belong to you, what is not your highest version, which is what is not your core self that you have taken on and shedded. And, this is this book that I've been trying to write for what feels like 100 years. And even though I love writing and I'm not afraid to write the book on a conscious level, I don't know what the hell the block is. However, this is the whole premise is that we think we are broken because our relationships fall apart because you know, we can't have relationships. They're always a disaster. We're always picking the same kind of wrong person, or even friendships, even jobs. We think that we repeat these patterns and that we're broken, that there's something wrong with us. And that's why we can't participate in these things that society, culture, or family has told us is what makes us valuable, worthy, contributing, responsible, blah, 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 whatever those other things are. These moments in life that feel hard show up to strip you of the things that you have been holding as a truth for who you are or how you should be living or what your goals and desires should be that are not really yours. And that they fucking fall apart. It's not you that's broken. It's your ideas, it's the mind, it's the programming, it's the beliefs. And they fall apart so that you can see your own wholeness, so that you can get realigned back onto the path of who you are meant to be in your fullest form, in your wholest form, in your healthiest form, in your highest form, who you are at your core and what you are brought here to do. And we beat ourselves up, criticize, judge, beat ourselves down, thinking that we are broken. And it's never been us. It's never been us. So I think while I maybe didn't share a whole lot of particular experiences, and I've had some real good ones too, y'all. So don't be afraid to reach out and ask me. Um, you know, we think that somehow trying to fix ourselves all the time, particularly like going back to what I said at the beginning about spiritual toxicity, thinking that we, you know, You need to unblock something, unprogram something, release an energy around something. And I'm not saying none of that stuff is true. I'm not saying that some of it's not good. And also, it doesn't have to be true. We can just step out of all of it because all of that is a false illusion. So maybe my message to wrap is that my life has been riddled personally with a lot of self-judgment and self-criticism, a lot of harshness and being incompassionate. And my life experiences and my outside world has often reflected that back to me to validate that treatment of myself. And that no matter what your pivotal moments are, what your experiences have been and how many you've had, because again, I've judged for how many I've had. The truth is that it's not helping you to keep comparing and judging and being mean to yourself, trying to will yourself, trying to heal yourself, always in that kind of manner, from a self-judgment and self-criticism standpoint. And so the next time you have a massive pivotal moment or experience, I invite you to bring love into yourself. And instead of asking, why is this happening to me? What do I need to heal in me? What is this reflecting me? I want you to say, how do I love myself better? How do I see my wholeness that always is? And then from there, you'll get redirected onto your path. And whatever needs to be let go of will be let go of. And so that's what I leave you with. Sojourners, thank you for joining in on another episode. Of course, I'd love to hear your thoughts. Share this with somebody else if you think it might be helpful to them. Please, I'd love it if you would subscribe, follow, leave a comment. I will see you on the next episode.